Welcome to the Modern Mythos Podcast, a show dedicated to the keepers and players of Call of Cthulhu and other investigative horror games. I'm John Hook.
And I'm Seth Skorkowski, and together we'll discuss writing, game mastering, and player tips and how you can apply them to your table. In this episode, we're joined by Ruthanna Emrys, author of the Innsmouth Legacy series, The Litany of Earth, Wintertide, Deep Roots, and we're very excited to talk to her. So, Ruthanna, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Oh man, this is so awesome. I just recently finished Wintertide, which is an amazing book. I love the use of the deep ones and stuff. So I wanted to kind of kick this off, if you would, kind of tell our listeners about the Innsmouth Legacy series. Maybe spoilers as you desire, but sell these books, right? Let's get people into it.
The Innsmouth Legacy series is about Aphra Marsh, one of the last survivors of Innsmouth after the federal government raided it in 1929 and put all the deep ones in concentration camps. I did not make that part up. That part is in the original Lovecraft. And when I read that, and then I was supposed to be rooting for the people who put people in concentration camps, I had some thoughts, and it turns out I had couple 100,000 words worth of thoughts. So the book starts in 1949 and have Aphra and her brother returning to the old site of Innsmouth and trying to rebuild their community, having awkward conversations with their relatives who are living in wonder and glory under the water and would really like some great grandkids, and trying to deal with Yithian professors, Russian spies, and the general sorts of trouble that you find in the area around Miskatonic.
I love it. Another element of it that was really attractive to me, because in addition to being a fan of Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos, I love Star Trek. And George Takei, the actor, when he was a child, he and his family, they were taken to a camp in California, and it was just struck me. I was so amazed at how you wove together the taking away of the Innsmouth people and putting them in concentration camps, and you wove that in with the historical real life concentration, the deplorable use of the concentration camps for Japanese Americans. Well, and I'm sure all of the Asian Americans, and just kind of how you kind of weave that together with real life, and the launching point with that, and the characters that came along with that, and I just thought that was amazing and brilliant, and it really touched on something that I've been aware of only for a few years since George started talking about it, but it's another piece of that history that we can't forget, and I love how it's a nice touch where we're not going to forget this, and here's a fiction story that we can also include with it. But I loved that.
Yeah, when I was first putting together Aphra's backstory, it was almost just a side thing when I thought, well, they put the deep ones in these camps in 1929, and then you give it a decade and a half, and now most of the people in those camps have died because they couldn't get to the water when they went through their metamorphoses, and now the US is looking for sites for the Japanese internment camps, and here's one that's already built and is mostly empty. And then from there just came this whole second family that Aphra has with the Kodos, and having them as supporting characters and tying in fictional oppression with real oppression, because I very much did not want to do the X-Men thing where you have the Deep Ones standing in for some other oppressed group that is exactly like them, except they don't happen to have magical powers. Um, but I did want to play around with what is going to be similar across groups being oppressed, such that it's going to happen even with this somewhat different situation, and what's going to be different, and how are these things going to intersect, and also what would deep one Japanese American fusion food look like a few years later. But I did, in fact, end up reading as one of my pieces of research to Kay's discussion of his time in the camps in his autobiography. And it wasn't the only thing that I read, but I thought he did, in fact, do just a wonderful job of talking about it. And because he knew he was talking about Star Trek fans rather than people who were interested in the historical time itself, there were things that he actually mentioned in detail that other books just assumed people already knew. So I found it to be a very useful back bit, and I think that, although it's a couple of years ago now, so I can't remember the details, but I know that I pulled a couple of his mom's biographical details and gave them to Makoto.
Oh, that's
Oh,
awesome.
now, yeah, it clearly in reading it as well as Deep Roots, you have an absolute mastery of the Lovecraft universe and mythology. How did you get in to his writing or that lore? Because it spreads out far beyond just one
So
man.
funnily, I
It's
got into it by not having much mastery at all. So I started out in college having it sort of sideways as in jokes from friends who were playing Call of Cthulhu, which I actually did not play Call of Cthulhu in college. I was, I think, in a Star Trek game and couple of White Wolf games, but I was living with people who were making jokes about it, and I had plush Cthulhu's and Principia Discordias, and so I was making jokes about it before I was actually really into it. And then at some point later, when I started to think, oh, I should, actually read some of the original work. Um, and the way I ended up doing this was that my fiance, now my wife, would read to me. No, this was after we were married. So my wife would read to me stories from a Best of Lovecraft anthology while I was making dinner. And we would get excited about all the cosmic horror stuff and horrified by the the bigotry and make fun of how many times he said cyclopean. And
I was about to
then
say, like, how many
when
times he
she
said
read,
cyclopean?
yeah, so she read to me The Shadow over Innsmouth as part of this very first set of Lovecraft stuff I was reading. And I was so mad, and I stomped around the house for like 2 hours going, no one wants to read a story about oppressed fish people in a concentration camp. Now, someone tell me that no one wants to read a story about oppressed fish people in a concentration camp. And my housemate said, no, actually, we would like to read a story about oppressed fish people in a concentration camp. So I started writing about Afra. And I actually wrote a story that hasn't been published because it uh, wasn't really anything more than, look, oppressed fish people in a concentration camp. And I did later mine that one for bits of flashbacks, but it's never been published. And then I started writing the second Afra story, which was Litany of Earth, and got a lot of attention. And then I got on contract for a book. And at that point, I said, you know, I am a big believer in the difference between the sort of fandom that involves knowing every nitty gritty bit of trivia and the sort of fandom that involves reconstructing and deconstructing and creating things that fill in the gaps where people like you might fit. And at the same time, if I write this book, a certain sort of dude is going to come up to me and quiz me on Lovecraft. And I would rather be able to answer those questions. And also, I need to do some research to find more things to mine for this book. So I said, okay, so I need to read all of Lovecraft, not just the famous stuff. And as long as I'm going to do this, I might as well have some accountability and get paid for it. But I don't want to do it by myself. So I reached out to Ann M. Pillsworth, who at the time had also gotten a neo Lovecraftian story recently published in Tor.com, so same place that Litany of Earth was originally published. And she was writing in the very rare genre of Lovecraftian YA. Her books are great. People should totally go and read them. So I just cold called her and I said, would you like to collaborate with me on a blog post series reading all of Lovecraft? And she said yes. And this was a fabulous decision. And we went through all of Lovecraft. She has loved Lovecraft since she was a kid, so she's coming at it starting with the squee and sort of going into the problematic stuff, and I'm coming from the other direction. So we got to do a lot of interesting having different perspectives on things, and that was the Lovecraft reread. And then eventually we started going into the wider world of weird fiction. And at this point, I believe we started that in 2014. So we are now coming up on our ninth year of writing this series. And we've gotten to know each other. We've gone to a couple cons together. We are still having a ton of fun on it, and I can answer any question that anyone has about the obscure I probably can't answer anyone right now because at this point it's been a couple of years since I read them, but I can answer a lot of obscure trivia about Lovecraft stories and indeed about weird fiction in general. And I think it made the books better, and I think that it's given me a really interesting deep dive into this whole subgenre.
That is amazing.
And it was very obvious at reading it that you'd clearly read everything and really understood the source. So all the changes you made were very intentional and thought out. So I said that was it's one of the things that was very clear. Is like she knows her Lovecraft, so it it worked very well. Um, so the since you mentioned the concentration camps really kind of drew you into the I guess the deep one kind of story and plight, but you'd also a big part of that is also there this kind of an aquatic water religion, and then later on when we have ghouls in the second one, they were earth based,
Mhm.
aren't they? And do you have any kind of plans of ever kind of revisiting that, going through any more of the kind of your interpretations of how those work? Because I really enjoyed how you did that.
I got the first two chapters of the third book written, and I'm happy to write it anytime that Tor is happy to pay me for it. But apparently, the first two books didn't sell quite well enough for them to want a third. So I keep hoping something will happen so I can circle back because I want to do some really cool things with Shoggoths.
Ooh, I want that too. I want that too.
I have very
Uh,
strong opinions about Shoggoths. The horror of Shoggoths is the horror of slaves rising up and having their own language. Utterly terrifying.
oh my god. Oh my god. Yeah, that's so cool. It's interesting because um in all of the literature that that we're exposed to, at least all the literature that I'm aware of, um the Shoggoths are already enslaved. They're already bent to the will of their masters, and I always wondered what it would be like, for a Shoggoth before, like if they had a creation and they were, if there was an opportunity for them to be autonomous people, before the elder things kind of, broke them down and everything. So I find that interesting. Something else that I really touched on and really enjoyed in Wintertide was your use of magic, right? Magic, it can feel so different with different authors, but there was something really um, human, even though it was completely alien. There was something really human about the way magic was taught, how magic was encountered and felt. Our characters encountered what it was like to be on the opposite side of wards and talismans, right? What tell me more about that, because I have to imagine that um, there was a real process for you to try and integrate magic into this. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So when I thought about magic for this book, and I should say I am very much a pantser as a writer, so a lot of this I made up as I went along and then made it into a consistent system afterwards. But one is that I wanted to do the thing that Lovecraft did, where magic and science are really part of the same continuum of a set of laws of physics that are larger and more complicated and maybe more variable than humans understand. And so some of what I was looking at was, here is a set of things that you can do that different practitioners may treat as a science or as a spiritual practice. And so, what for Afra is very built around with ritual and belief and worship is for uh, Professor Trumbull very well understood set of ways of manipulating the universe, and is for the FBI agents who are sort of the X Files investigator guys, a new area of science that they're just starting to explore and have a great deal of confidence and overconfidence about. And if you look at the Yith and you look at the ghouls and you look at the people of the rock, they're all doing stuff with the same set of physical laws, but it isn't necessarily recognizable because they're all building a different belief set and structure of understanding around it. And that was a lot of fun to play with because we get the same thing with real life, the same plant can be treated as a recreational drug or part of a religious ritual. The same sorts of meditation can be integrated into a larger belief set or just something that people do to try and cope with anxiety.
Very cool. Very cool. Great insight on that.
No, and because Zethius, you had mentioned the professor, where we bring in your Yithians, which God, I loved her.
She was so much fun to write. She was the best thing, the absolute best thing for if you're ever going to write historical fiction, I strongly recommend sticking in a time traveler. Because any time that I made a reference and then I realized, no, that wasn't around in 1949, I could just give it to her.
That's awesome. Oh my God. That's the new Emrys time travel rule.
Wow. No, I like that. And, a lot of other things, which I loved how you wove in certain aspects, such as, Innsmouth had been torn down, but it was at the time of the story, it was being turned into the GI housing
Uh-huh.
for after the war. And, for some reason, it had always kind of like, I always kind of imagined it would just be like this kind of rotted place. It's just kind of that idea of like, well, this is what they would do with it. uh, really kind of struck me as this odd reel of they took this big plot of land that nobody was going to touch, and they stuck up the cheap housing there, and I really loved just that little detail to it, or just the aspect of when they have to meet grandpa, and it was the like we're going to be my great grandkids, which is like, oh god, yeah, I know this conversation so well. So
Yes.
uh
Ovid is also a lot of fun to write. He is not always a very nice guy, but he's a very opinionated guy.
He has the directness of speaking that a lot of the senior people in my life also seem to have. You know, they've discarded the need for a filter of any sort, and I'm like, really, I think you got rid of that filter too soon. Um, Hold on to that for just a little while longer. Maybe hit 200 years, and then let's get rid of the filter.
Yes, and the funny thing is that he is, from Afra's perspective, he is her grandfather, he is the representative of tradition. From the perspective of everyone under the water, he's a baby. He's a, he's under 200 years old. He's constantly telling people they should do things differently. He's always going off and doing weird things, and they just think he's this wild liberal and having those different perspectives. I wanted to do more with him in the third book too.
no, that's a really good point. From their point of view, it's like he's this tween. Yes. Yeah, coming in with all his kooky fads.
I had read about how one of the um, inspirations for this series, the Innsmouth Legacy series, was showing the rebuilding of a society. And I was wondering about some of the other elements that may have also been included, like progeny and family, and the kind of elements that were in on that. How did that play into your writing?
So one of the things that I was thinking about when I wrote the deep ones and after interacting with the elders was that I wanted to write people who were conservative but not any recognizable sort of conservative from our society. So their traditions are not our set of traditions. Their assumptions about what people must do and the roles they must play are not familiar ones. And that's for me an opportunity to think about the patterns of being conservative separate from the specifics. And it was interesting writing Afra because she's a much more tradition minded and conservative sort of a protagonist than most people tend to write. And like, I didn't want to write someone who was a bigot, but I did want to write someone who was very tied to long-standing traditions, cared about preserving them, cared about doing things that her family said, even as she is turning out to have the same sort of argumentative nature that Obed does. And someone who wouldn't just react to where are my grandkids with none of your business.
Well,
But
and I like how you played her Afra against um, the approach and the ideas that her brother had with the same subject. You know, he was all like, "Yeah, let's it's time. Let's get some kids here." You know.
no, having the conflicts between her and Caleb and her being more tied to the spirituality that they were raised with. I wanted to play with that because this is one of the places where Judaism has had quite a lot of internal debate about what does the Holocaust mean for belief in God and for what sort of trust we can have in higher powers, if any, and whether we believe in them at all. And I wanted to do a riff on that as well. So that's part of the disagreements that Afra and Caleb have.
Yeah, it makes them really real. So I really enjoyed getting to see that experience and see that relationship as they were building it. So that was really
Yeah, the
cool.
other side of family in the books for me was that one of the types of research that I got to do was that my parents were just old enough to be able to remember that time period. So my father was kid playing on the streets of New York in 1949, and so he could tell me a lot just about attitudes and little details, and if you were walking down a street in this area, what sort of things would you see. And my mother gave me a lot of background about her uncle, who was a gay guy in 40s New York, and who was, well, he wasn't with the FBI, was involved with government stuff, and who ended up feeding some into uh, some of the other characters and into my understanding of what it was like to be Jewish and queer and come from a lot of different directions in that time period.
Very cool.
And John, do you have anything else on this one?
No, I'm interested in her latest novel.
Okay, I was about to say I was gonna flip over to Half Built Garden.
So a half-built garden is completely different from the Innsmouth Legacy, except that large bodies of water are extremely important, and there is found family and snarky aliens. It turns out that this is my brand, Water, Found Family, Snarky Aliens. It's a near future science fiction book. It's about what happens when the people who have reorganized society to be able to deal with climate change have to deal with a problem that they're not well set up to deal with, which is aliens coming along and saying, so we don't believe that it's possible for a species to survive long term on a planet. You're coming with us now. And
All
the
right.
politics and disagreements and relationships that result from that. Um, One of the things that I did with that one was that I very deliberately set it about as far in the future as Wintertide was in the past, because I felt like I had a kinesthetic sense at this point of how much things had changed since the late 40s and early 50s, and so I tried to make something with about that much change going forward. And it was also
I feel like
yeah.
modern people are better able to extrapolate what the future could possibly be than what science fiction writers of the 40s and 50s did, because we clearly do not have flying cars, you know.
I mean, we don't have flying cars, but we do have a cyberpunk dystopia.
That's true.
And we actually do have flying cars. It's just that we don't have regulations that let everyone go around flying cars.
Yeah,
Like, you can
they're
absolutely get a
certainly
flying
not
car and you can take
everywhere,
off
you
at any
know.
airport too.
Yeah.
I don't know, I've always found it difficult to do with science fiction is those things that you can overlook. Like Gibson laughs about how, Neuromancer defined cyberpunk, and he didn't imagine cell phones.
Uh-huh.
Uh, the opening chapter of that is a guy just running around Tokyo, just trying to find a guy. With today, we just pick up our cell phone.
Hmm.
So as much as he created the concept of, cyberspace and all that, it's all undone by a Nokia. So it's,
Yeah, I mean,
Flip
it was a
phone Nokia.
very 80s set of assumptions about the future. But no, I mean, it's one of the things that interests me as someone who, in addition to being a science fiction writer, is interested in foresight as a field. And I am always very mindful of Ursula Le Guin's point that the goal of science fiction is not, in fact, prediction, but it's really cool when you do manage to predict things.
Yeah. It's neat to see things and go, "Ooh, it didn't have the name, but this is that in the future," you know.
Uh-huh.
So that's awesome.
I think the cooler one is when they do come up with it, then they name it after what the author had called it. With the author just made it up one day. That's
We
like
have
always
now
like.
invented the torment nexus from the book. Do not invent the torment nexus. No, and I was at a panel. I was listening to a panel with some science fiction authors and some Silicon Valley guys. And one of the Silicon Valley guys said that cryptocurrency was originally inspired by Neil Stephenson's Cryptonomicon. And I just went, oh my God, I have a new goal as an author. And that goal is that no one will ever say that my stuff inspired a technology that is that useless and that harmful to the climate and the economy.
I
Nice.
I actually just finished Cryptonomicon probably about 2 months ago, and it was really creepy because it's about the rise of cryptocurrency, but it's written before it, so I didn't know that the book helped inspire cryptocurrency.
Uh-huh.
Oh, wow, that's weird, but because the whole time I was reading, like, God, man, he really has his finger on the pulse of stuff because ain't nobody seen this yet. Well, evidently, no one
Oh,
had, and they thought that
direct
was a good idea.
inspiration.
I'm sure his sequel is about NFTs, so it's gonna be fine.
That was a really weird book, John. I don't know if I would recommend it to you. It's a good book, but really weird. Ending just kind of happened.
But yeah, with a half-built garden, I legitimately was trying not so much to predict as to inspire. I was trying to think about, okay, what's a future that we could aim for that would allow us to survive as a species? And the thing that upset me with that is that I could not come up with one that preserved the internet as we know it today. I couldn't see that happening. So it has a much more balkanized set of networks that are more localized and more focused.
That's very cool.
But I like the internet. I am very fond of the internet.
We definitely miss it when it's gone. My family and I had a loss of internet over the weekend, and it was brutal for some, but we survived. So with Half Built Garden published, what is Ruthanna Emrys working on now?
So after Half Built Garden, I honestly had a couple of years of just sort of poking around and finding it hard to write during a pandemic. I think I am on to my next one now because I'm now working on one that has snarky aliens and large bodies of water and found family. A little more dystopian than A Half Built Garden, but another science fiction book with uh, people seasteading to get away from laws about their rights and personhood that are changing even more rapidly than they do now. So it's a bit of a response to the way it felt when my wife and I might, you drive over a state line and then they don't recognize your marriage anymore, and then they pass it and then they take it away again, or the way that trans rights are being treated right now, and just that sense of even when someone gives you the rights, the setup is such that they might take it away again at any moment. So there is seasteading, and there's pirates, and there are sapient squid, and there are frustrating politics. So I'm just in the first couple chapters right now, so we'll see where that goes.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to that, and I hope you are able to return to a Lovecraftian universe. I'm deep into. I'm now so intrigued. I'm going to definitely be finishing the entire Innsmouth Legacy. So,
Yeah, and I do have um, short story that's Lovecraftian coming out in an upcoming anthology in the next few months. The editors of Gods of H.P. Lovecraft, which is one of the anthologies that we've regularly mined for reading the weird, is now doing a set of follow ups focused on different Lovecraftian gods. And there's going to be one focused on Azathoth, and I've got a story in that.
awesome.
Oh, good to know.
Yes, that is awesome. Yeah, I'll be looking forward to that. I'm a big fan of anthologies. I love collecting short stories, and it's just a great comfortable book. I find anthologies to be comfortable. Just be able to pick it up. You can read one or two stories. You're great. You can put it back and pick it up later. I think it's just awesome. I love that as a
Yeah,
format.
I'm always looking for more because we, like I said, mine them for the column. What's your favorite Lovecraftian anthology?
Ooh, the anthology itself. Well, there's so many of the anthologies that are not Lovecraft's anthologies.
Yeah, not just Lovecraft, but weird fiction in
Oh,
general.
okay, weird fiction. So, I'm loving the chromatic court because I really enjoy like the King in Yellow and that kind of weird thing. So it's Lovecraft tangent. It's
King
adjacent
in
to that.
Yellow is
So
so good.
oh, so good. I love the King in Yellow. I enjoyed Ramsey Campbell's Cold Print. I think that's an amazing book. I'm looking at my library because I've got them all right here. And my favorite modern author with Lovecraftian notes is John Langan. He's got a ton of
Langan
great
is
short
really good.
stories. Oh, so good, so good.
Yeah, my favorite currently is Sonia Tafe, although Livia Llewellyn is also really terrific. I, if I'm not careful, I might try to name my favorites. I'm like, oh, this one and this one and this one. This is what
Right?
happened.
Yeah, it's
And
so
not
hard
name
once you open that floodgate. It's hard to put the dam back. Like, oh, got to hold back. I don't want to just start over running.
I was about to say, so John, I actually just got the copy of Leaves of the Necronomicon that you had
Oh,
sent me. So
excellent. Yeah, that's a
uh,
great. That's a braided novel. So that's so awesome about that.
like I said, I've only had 2 days, so I haven't had time to crack it open yet. But I did just get that, so thank you. Um, for me, actually, the my favorite anthologies were actually like I don't know, they were usually the very like the more sword and sorcery stuff is the stuff that actually got into. So I got into Lovecraft through like Liber and that direction. I came in from more of the Conan direction originally, so it was a lot of like the Rogue Blades stuff that got me into it. And Jon, back in like 1981, just like stepped into it and
I was introduced to Lovecraft through the role playing game. A buddy of mine had a copy of the Call of Cthulhu role playing game, first edition, and I remember playing that. We'd make characters and because of our Dungeons and Dragons experience, many of our Call of Cthulhu adventures were very combat focused and everything, but I loved how the role playing game sourced actual stories, literature. And so I was like, well, this seems really interesting. So let me kind of get into this. And I can't remember the name of the first anthology that I bought, but the first story that I read of Lovecraft's was The Outsider, because being logical as I am and methodical, I went through the table of contents and went, well, this is a story of a length that I can read in a single sitting. So let me just see what that's like. So I read it in a single sitting, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And so I started getting deeper into it. I feel like at the age and the time that I was getting into it, my read and my interpretation was very surface. So I didn't have the wherewithal to really kind of read the deeper context into anything. So it took me a while to kind of have that light bulb turn on and go, Lovecraft, while he's talented and can tell good stories, he is kind of a bigot. And I was like, oh my god! It was like one of those things where it was in your face the whole time, but you just didn't see it. And I'm like, oh, oh wow, yeah, that was weird.
Yeah, it's
Except for
so
the one
interesting.
story with
There's
the
so
cat.
many authors who their bigotry, like clearly it makes them worse authors when it shows up. And with Lovecraft, it's so closely tied in with the stuff that's good and the stuff that's terrible about his work. Sometimes it's the same stuff. And the fact that he was so scared of anything slightly different from him, but was able to turn that into sometimes giving this sense of just how different things could be. And so you just have this whiplash between, oh my god, he's terrified because people are speaking different languages in New York. And some of those people are related to me, I'm pretty sure. And and he's terrified because of this sense of deep time and the unimportance of humanity and the way the rest of the universe is so different that we are just this weird little strange thing that no one even notices. And it's all tied together, and it's that mess of horrible gunk and amazing awe-inspiring stuff that I think is what keeps me diving into it. Like I love problematic texts. I love playing with problematic texts. I love taking them apart to see what makes them tick and put them together into something interesting. Um, and I think that's why I ended up writing a response to Lovecraft rather than to, say, Robert Chambers, who is absolutely brilliant, but there's there's less turning over rocks and going ew.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I say that not at all to diss on the King in Yellow, because I absolutely adore the King in Yellow stories, and I think Repair of Reputations is one of the most brilliant stories from that time period.
Yeah, and there's so many subtle things in it that
Mhm.
I try to mine when I'm doing role playing stuff. So everything's, it's brilliant. So
John, you ain't got to sell me on the King in Yellow. So no, and Repair of Reputations. Yeah, it was also. I just remember when I read that, I hadn't realized that that whole it was a sci-fi story at the time it was written, but it took place the distant future of 1920. And so when I'm reading it, I think around 2015 or something for
Yeah.
the first time.
Unless it doesn't, unless it is actually taking place in a different time when the guy is hallucinating about the distant future of 1920.
It's like like it was reading. It's like, oh, they're going to the suicide machines, like an episode of Futurama, and
Uh-huh.
I'm like, what? And there's nothing in there about like prohibition, and then it was like, wait, hold on. When was this written?
Uh-huh.
Okay, let me back up. All
Yeah.
this makes sense.
And also, because I was reading this as part of the Lovecraft reread, it took me a few pages to figure out that Chambers was not in favor of the bigotry that he was depicting in that story. But it's very clear after you get a little bit into it that, man, is he not in favor. It is not okay.
No, and those are just so just weirdly imaginative, and then when you kind of go back of like the excerpts of a play that has never been written, and just all of the weird little stories how he wove it together. I don't know, I found it brilliant. That's also why when we started True Detective season 1, and all of a sudden I like gave the King in Yellow reference, and my wife, who was not familiar with it, didn't understand why I was like, "Oh my god, yes!" I just it's like Matthew McConaughey's chasing the King in Yellow, so excited, and then I had to explain to her why, and she just looked at me patiently and smiled because she was happy that I was happy.
And we were talking about anthologies, and Ashes and Entropy is one of my favorite recent ones. Fiona Maeve Geist has this amazing story in there that is a King in Yellow riff where the the play is a rock opera,
Ooh.
and it's this mix of King in Yellow and Gonzo journalism. It's absolutely remarkable. Ashes and Entropy is the anthology, and I'm not going to try to say the title of Fiona Maeve Geist's story because I always forget it. It's like red snow, white ashes, black something, or something is red and something is black and something is white, and what one of those things is snow, but not the white thing.
All right.
And it is a rock opera version of The King in Yellow.
Yeah, rock
I
opera, Gonzo journalism.
no, yeah, the Gonzo journalism is just kind of just an odd twist as I was trying to wrap my head still around rock opera King in Yellow because
Uh-huh.
I hadn't quite recovered from the first statement before you threw the second one at me.
Yeah, I also love Alexis Hall's The Affair of the Mysterious Letter. It's a riff on Sherlock Holmes, but it also has post colonial Carcosan expatriates in it.
What is
And
this title?
The Affair of the Mysterious Letter, Alexis Hall.
All right.
Okay, so give me that description one more time. So post colonialism.
Post colonial Carcosan expatriates are hanging around in the story, and it's very strange. Because the question is, like, can you really have overthrown the King in Yellow, or do you just think you've overthrown the King in Yellow?
These are some amazing suggestions that we will be definitely including in the show notes because I'm hoping there's a lot of book buys out of this episode. Um,
John's been furiously writing down everything that you have said. So
our show notes have been getting longer and longer. I'll be like, yes, keep talking, keep talking. I love it. I love it. Well, Seth, do you have anything else?
I think I am good.
Ruthanna, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I was thrilled. I had such a good time.
Thank you for having me.
I know I'm really excited. Like I said, I've been a fan of Wintertime for years. So when John I think started this podcast 2 years ago, that was actually one of my first suggestions. It's like eventually we should call her. And then, we made it through a pandemic and neither of us got around to it.
That's
And
right. So many things. Weirdly.
so I'm actually just really excited just to just be able to chat and kind of get your kind of take on I, kind of where that came from, because I personally found your interpretation and your twist on things just very inspiring to how I approached all of that mythology since then. So because I said you clearly had a mastery of it, you clearly had your own direction, but you're also very respectful to it at the same time, and that was what I think was the kind of the hard twist of a lot of people will take their interpretation and kind of turn it on their head and not have the same respect for the source material, and you did it very beautifully, and it I enjoyed it a lot. So I'm very happy just to get to meet you. I've been like trying not to fanboy this entire time. So
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you for letting me fanboy because I enjoyed this conversation immensely.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that you were doing the audiobook. Gabra Zachman was such a great narrator for those, and I had so much fun working with her, because she's one of the people who will say, okay, how do you pronounce this, how do you pronounce this, and these are books in which I literally created a language not pronounceable by the human tongue, and she
Right.
managed it. And then I said to her, I kind of owe you a fruit basket for all of the unpronounceable conlangs that I sent you. And she said, no, I don't want a fruit basket. I want more unpronounceable conlangs. So she was a very good fit for the books.
Oh, that is awesome. So cool.
one of the things with my first audiobook is you never realize how many words you made up
Uh-huh.
until your narrator's like, hey, a couple quick questions. How do I pronounce it? Like there's this giant list of words. Like, oh, I hadn't realized. I thought maybe there was five, and
Did
I
you
was
know
wrong.
that you put in lines in Japanese, Spanish, Yiddish, and Enochian? Well, you did, and now you have 5 days to explain how to pronounce those things.
And I don't know if you have this. With a lot of the made up words, I personally don't know how to pronounce them because I've had people say like, "How you pronounce this?" Like, I don't know. I know what it looks like, and the visual to me was what usually meant more to me. So when I've had to been asked like, "How do you pronounce this?" Like wow, it never occurred to me somebody would want to pronounce it. To me, it was like a glyph and crap.
Yeah, I was
So
not thinking about the audiobook when I wrote Wintertide, and then I was thinking about the audiobook when I wrote Deep Roots. And the fact that I put in the name anyway probably tells you something about my judgment.
Nice.
It's a
That's
okay,
perfectly
that one
nice
deserved
traditional Migo name.
a fruit basket. Was just that as the card.
oh man. Well, thank you so much, Ruthanna. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to chat.
And we want to thank our patrons. Really, honestly, without our patron support, we just could not do this show. So thank you so much. We have a new patron, Burke Sawyer. Thank you, Burke, for your support.
Thank you very much, Berg.
If you are interested in becoming a patron, please go to patreon.com/modern_mythos and sign up to become a patron. We could really use the support.
And we cannot do this show alone. We want to thank our amazing editors, Max Mahaffa and Edwin Nagy, and their hard work and keen skills at making us sound awesome.
We also want to thank John Sumrow for our badass logo. He's an incredibly talented artist, so please follow him on Facebook and check out his official website, and consider joining his Patreon as well. We'll have links to those in the show notes.
Finally, we want to thank the Darkest of the Hillside Thickets for generously allowing us to use their song Gluttony as our intro and outro music. If you're a fan of Lovecraft's writing and the Call of Cthulhu role playing game, then you need to check out the Darkest of the Hillside Thickets. Please check out their Bandcamp site and official band site. Links below in the show notes.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.